would be is, the first thing is connectedness. You need to have a connected business. Your customer, your back office needs to speak to what your front office is doing. You need to have real-time data and understanding and insights on what and how your business is ideally doing. So it's data-driven. And someone mentioned data, which is very true. Data-driven businesses. And this is where this connection ideally would come. Because why? The connectedness between the different tools, the different technologies. I want to believe most of us even have apps that your customers ideally would be using. And this ideally needs to ensure that trust is maintained as an imperative. The second thing is a complexity, because innovation ideally will always spark growth. And to drive this growth, you need to invest in some of these cutting edge technologies. And that is where the issue comes in, because with every investment in technology, there is an array of weaknesses that we have to be aware of. The tide has changed. You know, I remember when I was growing up, we used to have bank robbers who would go, and the AK-47s, and the popular car that they used to use was a 504, right? And you'd hear these big names, and they were very notorious. And you'd read in the newspapers that they stole 24, 30 million, very high amounts of money, right? But now the tide has changed. You rarely hear such instances. I think the only outlier was the tunnel in Thika, somewhere in Thika, that was built down, right? But is that to say that these institutions are not losing money? No. In fact, more than ever, they are losing more money than even before, because the tools of trade have changed significantly. Right now, you're not just dealing with that curious person. Now you're dealing with syndicates, highly resourced, very orchestrated. And I'm going to talk about that because I do a lot of research in that space. There's something called dark web. It's a place that I wouldn't want anyone to go, because you'll see very interesting things. But what happens there is that some of these tools that are even used for hacking, I don't even need to be technical to use them. I just need to be connected. In fact, there's one that I saw, there is even a revenue share agreement. They give me the tools, I'm not technical. I use it, I tell them this is the organization I want us to hack. Let's hack it. They will do all the dirty work. And then by the end of the day, when they get money, they give me 40%. All I needed to do is just to identify and approach someone who's going to help me get in the bank. And again, the other point I'm going to make, your insider. That is the biggest thing you need to worry about. But we'll get to that. And then, of course, when you talk about the increased adversarial activity, is that your threat actors have ideally increased. Now you're talking about people beyond the borders of Kenya, but also people within your borders, and particularly within your perimeter, which are your employees, right? And that is your biggest threat. So, and some of these guys would ideally exploit, system weaknesses, and some of them, they know it too well. In fact, I have a theory that 90% of every successful hack has an insider to it. How many agree with me? No, how many agree with me? 90% of every insider, of every successful hack has an insider angle to it. There's a friend of mine, he had recently joined a bank as a system admin. And you know the way we normally update our LinkedIn? So what happened when he did that, he got an invitation for coffee at Java. And when he went and he was curious, he thought maybe it's some other job offer that he's going to get. So he met 3 interesting people. One of them was a foreigner. The way he tells me that he had a Russian/Ukrainian accent. And there was a lady there and another gentleman who was a Kenyan. And they told him that we've seen that you've gotten this very good job as assistant admin in this bank X. I'm not going to mention the name. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you $50,000. And what you need to do is just go with this flash disk and put it in the core banking server. 50,000 USD. That's equivalent to over 6 million, right? This is a system admin. He was being paid around 65,000. And is being given a life-changing amount. He has the ambition to buy a blue, shiny, loud Subaru and land somewhere and show off, right? Because he was young then. All he had to do is just go with that USB, slot it in, and walk away. Simple. Question. How many insiders are going to look the other side or are going to resist that offer? Luckily, and that's why we're still friends, he declined, and he actually went and reported it to the police. And I'll tell you, 2 months before that, a certain bank, a big bank, had lost around 40 million from a single hack. Is it just a coincidence that people would come from Russia and hack your organization? No, it's not, guys. Your adversaries have ideally changed. So, what are some of the triggers again? When we talk about the drivers, particularly this growing digital cybersecurity landscape, I mean, there are quite a lot. We'll talk about emerging technologies, the likes of AI. We talk about your customers now want to be digitally enabled. They want to interact with you, maybe using the app. So that increases your threat landscape. Why? Because now technology is in their fingertips, right? And then you talk about your connected products and how everything comes together. You talk about your single pane of view of your customer, how data will move from one system and to the other. You'll also talk about things like endpoints and unsecure devices. After COVID, we now know that work is no longer in the office, work is anywhere. I was approving invoices this morning in my room. I am still working, right? Why? And I was just using my iPad and my phone. That is a new dispensation we're living in because your workforce is no longer just in the office. Everyone got connected, particularly after COVID is when we saw now work can be anywhere, right? And that again increases the threat and risk landscape. And then, of course, talking about shift to the cloud. The organization should not just be doing well, it should do cloud. Why? There are obvious benefits, but that is not my topic of the day. And then, of course, IT and OT environments. And the lines have really become blurred. Why? Because when you talk about having a data-driven organization, you need to collect data from everywhere, right? On average, I'll tell by a scan in this room, on average, you have 3 devices that are connected to the internet: your laptop, your phone, your smartwatch, maybe you have something else, and so on and so forth. This has increased that landscape. And that is why when we talk about cybersecurity, there is this whole paradigm, and not to mention the supply chain risk, because you definitely have third parties, right? And these are people, most of the times they're connected to your environment. So what happens when they go rogue? Or what happens when your third party is third party? Because every third party also has a third party, right? So it's an ecosystem approach. You share data with them, they get data from you, but they also share that data. Question: what happens when there's a breach? Who's going to take responsibility? Do you understand how your data moves from your organization to these other organizations? And those are some of the things that we need to understand, because you cannot protect data that you don't know where it is. And fundamentally, before we talk about these controls, all those tools that are very expensive and nice to have, and by all means, they're very effective, we need to talk also about the basics. Do we understand how data moves in our environment and from our environment or to our environment? So, a few statistics that I gathered, and this is based on a few reports that I read. So currently, we had, according to Barracuda Networks, they had a 665 increase in email phishing attacks. How many know what an email phishing attack is? Yes, okay. How many do not know? That's why we're here, to share. By a show of hands. A phishing attack? All right. Who has ever been a victim of a phishing attack? Thank you. All right. So what a phishing attack is just like phishing. So a hacker would ideally send you an email purporting to be someone that they are not, and this email is actually meant to deceive you. Are we together? So this is what we call social engineering. It's one of the most effective ways of doing a hack in any organization. There's a bank I recently did a social engineering test on, and I was able to siphon their what do you call this? Their financials. Yeah, financials before they even reported. And I was just sending a very simple email to the CFO, and we were telling him, hey, there's this and that you need to look at the report. And the art of deception is very interesting, and it's actually very simple. I just need to make you believe that I'm a legitimate user. For instance, if maybe you visited Lake Naivasha, and the lady probably at the reception, the entrance, I get access to that list, or I get access to a list that has your emails, and then I send you an email and tell you, we are running a campaign, and as Lake Naivasha Resort, we want to give you a free holiday for you and your family. Were you at Lake Naivasha? Yes, you are. Does the email make sense? Yes, it did. Is it enticing enough? Yes, it did. It does. Because we all want holiday. We all want free things, right? And that is actually the simple art of deception. One of the things we normally do, the biggest tool is Google. I just need to Google your name. I'll Google the CEO and I'll know he likes golfing at a certain, probably he posts it on social media. I'll get his Facebook and I'll know, oh, so he golfs at Modaiga. So I just need to send him something telling him that we're having a world tour for golfing and you've been nominated to be a winner. Because you just need to establish a link. And that link is called trust and to convince people. And that is why we always tell guys that you need to be very aware and be extremely cautious with this thing. Ransomwares came to the fore, and I'm going to talk about that later. And how they did it was very simple. Emails. Very simple. They were just sending emails. And I remember when, in fact, one that I received, I personally, and I'll honestly admit, and this was still early days of COVID, and it purported to be WHO, but the domain was ideally very off. And what it said is that we have noted new symptoms that could affect you, new symptoms of COVID that you should be aware of. I can't remember how it read exactly. But for me, then I was scared, right? Because during COVID time, ungesikia hata homa or even a sneeze, you knew things were thick, right? So I was very curious to know what this thing was. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm a cybersecurity person. I know better. Can I tell you, I clicked on that thing. I actually click, and I have to admit, because even the best of us fall prey to that. Why? Because when human beings are emotional, they are not rational. And that is one of the key tactics that social engineers will always try to use. Another one that we did, and this was a social experiment, we got a lady who was a system admin. She was posting pictures on her social media of her daughter in school. So we knew the school, and we knew this is a school that the daughter goes to, and she would even tag the name. And I mean, it was very easy for us. So we sent her a picture and told her, look at what your daughter, I'm using a fictitious name, Zara, was doing yesterday. Now, if you send me an email and you mention any of my two children, I'm going to click on that thing. Why? Because there's something that you've touched, my emotion. True or false? I'm just trying to explain the science because that is how these criminals tend to think. They'll try to make you hooked. We call it the emotional hook to that thing. So 40%, 400% increase of brute force attacks. This normally are pretty much not successful as much because what a brute force is, you'd have a machine that is trying a computation of 2,000 password combinations within a span of like a minute, right? And anything that would ideally go through becomes successful. And that is what a brute force attack would be. The chances of success are normally very slim. Why? Because now security providers, or rather solution providers, have become very good in terms of how they put their tools to do that. And then $20 billion was actually the estimated cost of ransomware attacks. And this is something that you need to understand because ransomware is here to stay. How many have ever seen a ransomware attack or have received a ransomware attack or have been victims of that attack? It's one of the most devastating yet stressful things to go through. Because what a ransom would do, it would ideally just hold your data and tell you you pay the money, right? And the currency is Bitcoins. And now, why it's so effective is, I remember when this new wave of ransomware started in 2015, why it's so effective is that I don't need to focus my energy on one single target. I just need to pray and pray. Send it to as many people, spray it across, and pray that the right people are going to click. And if you're working on your data and all your servers have been corrupted by this ransom, and I'm telling you to pay me the equivalent of 1 million, will you pay or not? You'll pay, right? But we highly discourage that because when you pay these guys, you know what happens? You're encouraging the behavior. And statistically, some of them tend to tell you that given that you delayed by 3 hours, pay us an extra $500 or so that we can give you that data. But they're not in the business of giving you your data back. Once they get the money, they're done. And right now, we also have ransomware as a service. Yes, that I can actually go to a portal and buy a built ransomware. What I just need to do is identify the targets, put it on that portal, and once the money is paid, I'm given what? A commission. Are you seeing why this thing is very important for us to understand? Because what I'm trying to tell you is that the barriers to entry are very low. Anyone can wake up and decide to be a cyber criminal. And I know I'm talking to the right people, so no one will get inspired. These are not things I say in universities, right? Yeah, there's one guy who asked me, Anthony, before I start making 200,000 per month, it's gonna take time. How can I become a hacker? And he was so innocent and genuine. I was like, no, we need to pray for you first. So on average, $3.86 million is actually lost. The average cost currently, I know this has gone up based on more recent statistic. And then, of course, there was a 35% increase in ransomware. And right now, the way technology is going, this number is going to double by 2030. 3.8 billion devices, and it's going to double because, on average, like I said, we're living in the age and the rise of machines, right? Now, AI has come to the fore. Everything is connected. From your data, your insurer will want data from your smartwatch and so on and so forth. We have autonomous vehicles. You have all manner of things, including smart fridges and all that. So this number will definitely go high. So that is going to increase significantly. So what I want to demystify, I want to talk about key truths from a cybersecurity perspective that we all need to understand as a leadership team. Truth number one, a cyber attack happens every 39 seconds, right? And this is backed by research. Why is that so? Because there is something that we normally do, it's called threat intelligence. And threat intelligence is just to understand within the space, how many cyber attacks are actually happening. When I took a look at my dashboard this morning in Kenya alone, the number is quite high. And like I said, and oh yeah, there's an area in Nairobi around, it's not even Nairobi, around Juja area. Yeah? There's normally a lot of activity, cyber attacks that go on there, right? And you know why? So there's something that we do, it's called retribution. Retribution is when you get an attack, you try to find out where it's come from, right? So in that research space, and we do this out of research just to understand who are these actors. There's one time we saw that there were a lot of activity coming from Juja area, right? And your guess is as good as mine. You know, these are students. Yeah? You know, these are students. Let me tell you something else. This was in year 2019. There was a malware that was actually ranking top 3 globally. Top three. It was number 1, number 2 globally. Yeah. I remember number 1 was a China variant of a malware. Number 2 was coming from Iran side. Number 3 was coming from Kenya. To be specific, Juja. Why is this important? We have very good talent in Kenya. Let's be very honest. We have talented individuals. Yeah? So this is not an out there conversation. It hits home. For a malware to be top 3, we have very good talent. So when we look at the space, we always have these different attacks that happen, from some targeting, pipelines, and those are now nation state sponsored attacks. You also have some that are ideally targeting financial institutions. And the ones that are for financial or driven towards financial institutions, I'll tell you, the biggest motivation is one. What is the biggest motivation? Is what? It's money, it's economics. In fact, in cybersecurity, the biggest motivator for these syndicates is the money. And where people can make money, they become very, very creative and extremely innovative, right? And it hits home. And in your space, the SACCO space is one of the areas that I can tell you is a sweet spot. Your business model is very cash heavy. And they always say that, SACCOs tend to be a bit slow to upgrade on their systems and all that, right? And that's the perfect combination of some of these things that happen. And that is why right now, when we talk about this thing coming back home, it actually hits your space very, very well. So why am I saying this? It's because these cyber breaches tell us something. And we always try to understand, how did this happen? There's something called a cyber kill chain. And a cyber kill chain is like steps to a successful cyber attack. And it's always very predictable. And the reason as leaders you need to understand this is so that you can be able to defend yourselves. Now, who are the actors? When we talk about even some of the ones that ideally would fall within the SACCO space. And what are the potential impacts that you'd have? Number one, to your brand and reputation. Remember what I said earlier. Your biggest currency is what? Trust. If people do not trust you, they won't want to do business with you. And that is extremely key. So when your reputation is put at risk, and in fact, I always say that the worst place you want to see your business is a place called KOT, Kenyans on Twitter, because they will, massacre your brand. And that is a place you don't want to be in. And then, of course, there's a cost of remediation and investigation that's direct. Over and above the cost, the direct financial impact it's going to have. And then, of course, loss of intellectual property, regulatory impact, where the regulator would ideally want you to answer very hard questions, operational disruption, and all this ideally would have a direct effect and impact on your bottom line. So, truth number two is security should never be a bolt-on, but it's something that needs to be there as a design. Right now, we've moved in cybersecurity from just you do your system implementation, and then let's think about the cybersecurity later. We've moved from that. Now we are talking about cybersecurity by design. What do I mean? When you have your teams that are working on this, and when you have your project implementation and your system integrators working on this system, you need to ensure that these security principles are adhered to. And they're very simple and they're very easy, not easy, they're very straightforward to have because we have those standards. And like I mentioned, even within ISACA, that is what we push. So when we talk about migrating from the old system to the new system, whether you want to do it on-prem or cloud, there are pretty laid out standards that can be followed to make sure that as this thing is being done, it's being done securely. So as the functional requirements are being gathered, we are also having non-functional security requirements that are also being gathered so that they are also embedded and enshrined into the build. And then, of course, when you talk about this is you ensure ultimately you are reducing your exposure level. Because what is worse is to have something that is flying, but it has so many issues that it's going to be catastrophic within the next few months. Because it's actually more expensive from what we've seen to build on security to something that's already in flight. So what are we talking about here? Making sure that when you're doing end-to-end implementation, security by design is ideally adhered to. And that is where you need to have an integrated cyber security strategy that incorporates all the changes that you're going to have in your environment. Because like I mentioned earlier, the technology space is highly dynamic. The system that you have today may not be relevant tomorrow. In fact, we talk about patch management, making sure that all the systems are upgraded and all that. It's fantastic. But it's we're always trying to play catch up with that. So having this integrated into your business and making sure that you have this as a transformation agenda will ensure that you have customer trust, which is extremely important, and something that ideally is going to make sure that the posterity of your organization is ideally maintained. What is the other truth that I also want to talk about? But before that, some specific considerations that you need to do is to look at how you're going to embed these standards. And we have many references. In fact, our professionals within ISACA, we actually have an agreed body of knowledge that we tell them, when you're conducting an audit, this and this is what you need to follow. When you're in a system development project, this and this is what you need to look at. And that is what we define as system by design. So how do we manage and what's the best approach to managing this risk? And this brings me to the other truth that I want to mention here as well, that adopting a cybersecurity framework and also understanding the compliance is extremely key. All right? So when we talk about adoption of a cybersecurity framework, what are we talking about? Because we have, cybersecurity is not a Kenyan issue alone. It's not an Africa issue alone. It's a global issue. Do you agree? So we actually have these frameworks that ideally would define this extremely well. So having that understanding will ideally help you do the right things because you don't want to second guess or shoot in the dark, right? And one of the things that we always recommend is consult those experts because it's going to be even more effective to do that because you're going to have a return on your investment directly. So Key questions you need to understand. And the framework needs to speak to these key things. The first thing is situational awareness. And situational awareness speaks to the what, who, and how. Who is our enemy? Who is the adversary? Who is a cyber attacker? You know, one of my favorite books, The Art of War, says, the author said that when you're in any war, Sun Tzu, when you understand your enemy very well, for every battle that you're going to go into, you're guaranteed of success. So when you have a very good understanding of who the adversary is, what's their motivation? What are they after? Is it data? Is it money? Is it an insider who's going to do that? Is it an external outsider? Is it your contractor or even your third party? Because I've seen most of the times, you can have a third party that goes rogue. You've delayed on their payment, and then they decide, you know what? We normally see a lot of money here. There's a story a friend of mine tells me. He runs a cybersecurity firm. And in this organization, it was actually a bank. A lot of money was stolen. And it was obvious that there was an insider who was involved. And then when they did their forensic investigation, they found out the person who was doing that was actually a deacon in the church. Yes, a very highly ranked deacon in the church. And then they asked him, Mchungaji, what went wrong? And the version of my story, or the story that my friend tells me, is that the guy said, you know, mimi munanipatia, I don't know how much. Na kila siku naona 40 million inasonga. Mchungaji pia kuna macho. Very funny story, but it actually tells us that opportunity can create a thief, right? An insider doesn't start as a rogue person. They normally start as good individuals, right? Very compliant, but all of a sudden they get curious because you can never predict the next step of a human being. And that is where the biggest challenge is with insider threats. I have personally stood in the law of court, in the courts, testifying, you know, after we do this forensics and all that. And these are people who started their careers extremely, extremely well. Amazing, full of potential, bright future ahead. But they got an opportunity and they seized it. Your insider threats, that is where you need to place your emphasis. So you cannot trust people just for the sake of it. And that is why as cybersecurity, we've actually now moved to this new era of zero trust. We have security solutions that even your most trusted employee is being monitored. What they do is being verified so that anything that is off, you're going to pick it in real time. And that is what we're talking about today. So you need to understand that risk exists, situational awareness. And then secondly, what tactics might they use? Is it social engineering? Is it, like I mentioned, somebody can go and slot in an USB and harvest money or partner with syndicates? And then all of a sudden you're seeing someone with a Range Rover or a Mercedes. But they're smarter nowadays. They know how to lay low. So they will not, you know, raise any eyebrows, right? So you need to understand the tactics. What are they going to use? So that framework would ideally give you that situational awareness. And then this risk program and governance, and maybe let me talk about some of the actors that we have for your information. Cyber criminals, like I mentioned, these are the guys who, and this is very, in fact, there's a very big difference between a cyber attack and fraud. True or false? Most of the times we normally hear people say that it was cyber attack, but it was actually fraud. Yeah? That distinction has to be very clear because a fraud may not be a cyber attack. It may have been done using technology, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a cyber hack. And then, of course, you have activists, and these ones are normally agenda-driven. Some of them would say that they have an ideology that they're trying to push. So particularly when we talk about things like pro-climate change activists, so they would attack anything that is using fossil fuel. Yeah, some of them might be religiously driven. Yeah, you'd find syndicates that probably they have some political reservations against maybe a certain state. So they'll do these things to send a message. We recently had one that was called Anonymous Group, and that is exactly what they were doing. And then also you have nation states. Nation states is where there's some geopolitical agenda. For instance, you normally hear about China trying to hack, I don't know, US, right? You hear about Russia trying to do I don't know what. So those are nation states. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, right now, the age and era we are in, maintaining and safeguarding the territorial sovereignty of a country is not just by using the old-fashioned army, right? Even in Kenya, I'll tell you for a fact, we have people now are being recruited as military guys, but their skills are like mine. What they do is they make sure they're just monitoring stuff because that's the era and the age we're in. And then, of course, you have insiders and partners, and I think I've mentioned a lot about that. And I think that is one of your biggest areas that you need to focus on. Your competitors, where we talk about espionage, as well as skilled individual hackers. And these are people who are just curious and they get an opportunity. Yeah. For instance, most of the students, they normally start very well. They're just curious. But then when they realize they can make money, they change. Yeah. Because they have the skills. But then if those skills are not channeled right, then that tends to happen. So your risk framework, cyber risk framework should speak to that. Number one, your security controls. What controls do you have in the environment to ensure that your technology estate is ideally the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of your data and even your systems is maintained at all times? It needs to speak to that. And we have a library of controls that ideally would touch on that. And then, of course, vigilance. And by vigilance is normally detection. Yeah? But when it's happening, are you able to detect it? Because, some of these cyber attacks tend to be very stealth. Somebody who wants to get a lot of money is not going to be a one, boom, 100 million kind of a thing. Before they hit you 100 million, rest assured, there were small amounts of money that were ideally being siphoned from the organization. So when we talk about detection, is being able to detect when it happens, because the ability to have real-time detection when an attack happens is extremely critical because it reduces significantly, number one, the hack value, and hack value is why they do it. Number two, you're able even just to remediate those issues on time. So, and then of course, the last one is resiliency. And when we talk about resilience, is like I said in my opening statement, is not a question of if, it's a question of when it's going to happen, right? So anticipating. And in cybersecurity, we've actually moved from just cybersecurity to now cyber resilience. What is the difference? Cybersecurity will protect. Cyber resilience would ideally predict or anticipate that this thing one day it's going to happen. So when it happens, what are we going to do? When all our servers are down, what are we going to do? Do we have backups? Where is this backup? Is it working? Do we have the people who are going to do this? When we need to even send communication to our stakeholders, regulators, your customers, and your partners that this has happened. Because now the Kenya Data Protection Act stipulates that if you have been breached, you need to notify the commissioner. I'm sure we're all aware of that, right? You need to notify the commissioner within how many hours? How many? Has the data protection officer spoken? They did that? Excellent. You need to do that. So having that understanding extremely is very important so that you can anticipate what needs to happen. Yeah. And then, of course, when you talk about resiliency, and I know we have many controls that speak to that. I know this is not a topic, this is not a technical session, but let me just mention a bit. Number one, threat intelligence is extremely important because it helps you understand what's happening. It gives you insights where these things are coming from so that you can fortify the organization well. And then, of course, security monitoring, like I mentioned, you need to have detection and vigilance so that when it happens, we know. Because, data speaks, right? There is a time I was actually doing a research and I had this malware. And this malware was machine learning based. I don't want to say artificial intelligence because I don't think it was cognitive, but it was pretty much a machine learning malware. So it was on my laptop. And what it would do, it would detect my pattern of life. What pattern of life is your pattern when you log into your machine. Everyone has a digital pattern of life. For instance, 8 a.m. in the morning, I power up my laptop. The first thing I'm going to do maybe is check my Gmail. Second thing, go to Twitter. Third thing, maybe LinkedIn. Fourth thing, Business Daily or Nation. And then I'll open my email and I'll start sending, and it would be within a certain limit of data exchange, right? So that is the pattern of life. So it would understand before it does anything, it would understand what the pattern of life is. So after 30 days, what I noticed, what it was doing, it had understood that my data, we call it ingress, data that's moving from my machine, would not spike a certain limit. So it would start sending data from my machine to another CNC. CNC is a command and control server, but it would make sure it is within that limit so that my antivirus doesn't do what? Doesn't detect. Are you seeing how brilliant these things are? So when you do not have the ability to monitor and detect such behaviors, that there's a foreign agent, regardless, it is not doing anything that would go outside the norm, but it's there and it's doing something, means that that thing would be there for very long, right? And that is what happens. And trust me when I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the people we are talking about, they're not stupid. They're very smart. Because where there's money to make, like I mentioned earlier, they become extremely innovative, right? And lastly, oh yeah, so this is just the actors, like I mentioned. You have the insider threats, the people you need to worry about. They are the guys who understand the lay of the land, they understand the controls, they understand how everything works, and they're able to, you know, fit in that environment very well. So ideally, some of them, and let me also mention, we have 3 categories of insider threats. The first one, I call that person careless Carol, because this is someone who has been trained but still does the wrong thing, right? That's an insider attack. And then you have innocent Ian. He's very innocent because he has not been trained. He does not know. So for him, when he receives an email, he would open all these kind of attachments. He doesn't know that we have things like social engineering emails, phishing emails, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, and this is the one that you worry about more, is he's called malicious Mike. So what he does, he knows, he understands, but he has a malicious angle. He wants to make that money. He's always dreaming about that brown Subaru. Is it blue Subaru? And he has that ambition that I have to make it, I have to be rich by the time I'm 24. Are we together? Those are the people we worry about. So, and then you have the nation states I mentioned. You have the industrial spies, and this is for corporate espionage, particularly within a very competitive space and sector like research, R&D. In this region is not as prominent, but in other regions it is. And then hacktivists. Activists, like I mentioned, they have a ideology or agenda they're trying to push. What is the other thing that I want you to understand today is your business impacts. The business impact in terms of some of the threats that ideally would be very likely to happen within your environment. Phishing for credentials when they're looking for your passwords, that's a key one. Can I tell you another story? There's another social engineering test that we did. And what happened is that we were able to target one person who was a gatekeeper. And if there's anyone in IT, you'll understand who a gatekeeper is someone who has keys to the kingdom, right? So this individual, we were able to siphon his credential. And this was a social engineering test. And the organization had contracted us to do that. And what happened is that as a system admin, I think, you know, human beings, we can be very lazy, right? He had typed all the passwords and combinations for all the servers on his desktop. So all we need to do to get access to that organization's, all their core servers and everything, was just to compromise that single individual. So when we did that, we just opened his desktop. An assignment that was supposed to take 6 weeks took 1 week. Why? Because of that human weakness. And this is someone that has been entrusted by the organization to be the gatekeeper. Are we seeing that? And how many of you have such individuals in your organization? Because there's never coincidence. And that is normally the kill chain, right? And then, of course, malware, ransomwares, I spoke about that, social media threats, that's a bit intuitive, email and intellectual IP compromise, particularly for senior executives, board chairs, CEOs, board members, C-suite. People will always try to get you. And we normally call it whaling. Whaling, eh? Whale, the whale, the fish, the big fish. So when we do a whaling attack, is you're looking for the big man. That's the big man that you want. Because that man's email, his instruction, can actually authorize a very big transaction. True or false? So that's the playbook. If you get the CFO's or even the CEO's email, and you're able to send probably a few instructions here and there, you might be very successful. That is what we call business email compromise. And then, of course, insider threats, I mentioned about that, DOS attacks, corporate espionage, quite intuitive. So, key thing to understand, number one, understand your crown jewels, your data. Understand what are your critical assets. If you want to secure them, that has to be extremely important. So this can be customer information, partner information, sensitive information, including data about your employees and so on and so forth. Also looking at employee, third-party, personal data. This can also be POS systems and the whole array of where everything ideally sits in your environment, including your IP, very valuable competitive information that you do not want your competitor to have. And then, of course, even the backups, as well as lastly, financial data, which is quite intuitive, right? So that's just a snapshot of what your crown jewels would be. Because if you don't understand where your data sits and where your most important assets are, you may not be successful in securing them. So this is just a snapshot of a generic strategy to have. What I'm talking about here is implementing an effective framework. We have so many across board, and that ideally would guide you, driven by if it's implemented by the right experts and skills. So it would ensure that the triad of security, vigilance, and resiliency is maintained. So develop policies and framework. Make sure you will have effective policies on information security or cyber security and procedures to back it. Having this understanding of the threat and tactics, the situational awareness, and then it's very important you conduct a gap of where you are vis-a-vis where you want to be, so that now that roadmap is going to be very clear, the intervention that you need to make. And then, of course, invest in effective implementation. This is an investment game because the amount of money you'd lose if you don't do this far outweighs, in fact, not just money, or what you stand to lose if you do not invest in the right things, far outweighs anything that ideally you put up front. Because like I told you, the biggest currency is not even money, it's trust. True or false? And trust is like a glass ball. It might shatter. No matter how much you try to piece it together, it will still have cracks. People will still remember. All right? And then, of course, making sure that we're elevating this cyber risk as a strategic issue. It's not an IT issue anymore. It should be discussed in the boardroom. Leadership needs to set the tone. You need to ask the right questions. And then, lastly, awareness and creation is extremely, extremely important. So what is your role in cybersecurity? Very simple. Because again, like I said earlier, the board plays a critical role in driving this tone at the top. The board ideally would shape the culture, would drive this discussion leading from the front. So the first thing is you need to also be aware. Awareness is extremely critical. And this is where I like forums like this, where these topics are also being discussed in depth so that we understand on the criticality and why this is important for you. So that it's not your IT guy coming with newspapers of a bank that has been hacked in China and scaring the daylights out of you. It's not an effective approach. But you need to also demonstrate ownership, diligence, and that you're driving this governance effectively at a board level. And then secondly, making sure that you have these briefings and meaningful conversations with either the committees or the people that you've designated that responsibility to understand the threat landscape, to understand even the business critical risk. What does it mean for your business? What a cyber attack would mean for one business is not the same for the other. And sometimes it's very important to run even simulations, like to understand if at all there's a vulnerability and a penetration that a successful a penetration to our environment, what would be the impact? And calling in experts who, and ISACA, we have a collective of the same, who can even simulate this for you and tell you, actually, this is what I was able to get. Actually, this is the data that someone can actually get outside. And this is what it means for your data. And then being able just to put a dollar value and even to assess what the risk ideally there would be. And what does mitigation look like? And then, of course, understanding the business impact of an incident. For instance, how many businesses here would survive 2 weeks of a downtime? 2 weeks. Okay, how many would survive 1 week? None. Okay, how many would survive 5 days or 2 days? Okay, how many don't know? How many? No. Honest question. How many don't know? Yeah? You need to have that understanding. And that is why simulation becomes extremely important, right? So that you understand the business impact of an incident. If you lose 5 million, is it material to your business? If you lose 10 million, is it material to your business? If you lose 30 million, what would it mean? On the other side, if you lost all your customer data, what would that mean for your business? And if that data is published on Twitter and Nyakundi takes it, yeah, the blogger, what would that mean for your business? Those are the questions we need to ask. Yeah. So, and then of course, looking at all the policies and driving a culture of awareness and accountability. Someone has to be accountable. Question: who is accountable? And how are they going to report to you? Question: the data that you need, are they giving it to you? Question: what do you do with that data? When an incident happens, how are you going to ensure that that doesn't happen again? So that whoever it is, the head of IT, head of IT security, they can be giving you effective dashboards and they're telling you that this is where we are. As opposed to scaring you, they can give you data that can help you make a decision. And how are you going to know that you're actually improving the posture? Very pertinent questions we need to ask. How are we going to gauge maturity? How do we know that we are better than how we were? What are some of the drivers and some of the data that we need to be tracking, capturing, measuring, and reporting on? And that is where your responsibility in shaping that tone, because if it does not come from you, those questions, I'll tell you, it's normally a losing battle. The best organizations that I've seen that have managed this space very well are the ones where the CEO is very conversant. The board chair or even the audit committee chair understands very well and understands the question and the questions they need to ask so that you keep people on toes. You're not being fed by all manner of stuff, right? And then, of course, meeting with the responsible people, and I call them gatekeepers because they are gatekeepers, the head of security, the person who looks after that. And again, it's also prudent to consider investing in a dedicated resource that looks after this thing. Let's follow the risk. Let's follow the money. Where we have the potential of losing a lot of money, let's invest in the right resources. And then lastly, having a very big focus, particularly to understand where we are driving awareness and education across board, we need to do effective risk assessments, not only looking at our internal environment, but also looking at the entire ecosystem, your third parties. For instance, you might be very secure, but do you know, or are you confident that the person, the third party that takes your customer data or takes your financial data is secure? What steps have you taken to ensure that happens? You know, there's a story of Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. How many heard about that scandal? How many heard? Show of hands. Okay. This was about 2016. You can check it out. In fact, there's a documentary that speaks to that. It's on Netflix. It's called The Great Hack. You can write it down. The Great Hack. Go watch it. Amazing documentary. You know, Facebook was never hacked. Yeah? Facebook was never hacked. What happened? Poor governance. They gave their data, critical data, data about you and I. How many here on Facebook? Yeah, majority. Now at least I have many hands. Eh? Yeah. So they gave their data to a third party. And that third party was doing very rogue stuff, including using that data, yeah, to shape electioneering outcomes. The Donald Trump election. It was purely a technology play. Watch that documentary. It's going to tell you more about it. But you need to have an assessment of your third parties and really understand what are they doing with their data and how effective are those controls. And if they go rogue, what are you going to fall back on? And how are you going to make sure that they do what is right? In fact, that scandal, and in my view, I think it's the biggest data scandal in our time. In our time yet, I haven't seen any that has, had such an impact like that one. And that is what triggered GDPR, later triggered all these variants of data protection regulations. So to give you context, the day we are living in and the battle is not between the fast and slow, but it's between the agile and the people who can learn, the people who can unlearn. Because if you want to be competitive into the future, we need to study and see where things are going. Right now, if you're thinking of digital transformation, you're on the right track. But if you're not thinking about how to secure that success, because cybersecurity in a nutshell, it's all about securing success, then you might lose out on the gains that you'll have made. And as I conclude, the last truth that I want to mention is this is not an IT issue alone. Cybersecurity has to do with leadership. And like John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls in leadership. So if the men and women in this room are able to set the tone in the organization, you're going to see a difference here. Thank you very much.
Good. Yes. Now, one of the things I got is that you can be an ethical hacker. So, now that we are here and we've received all the information, fortunately today we were taken most. I did not see very many people nodding. Now, my technical team, you are out there. We coordinate this. We have questions to Mr. Muiyuro. Yes, Mr. Muiyuro. And we'll take 10. If we don't get any more, because you're likely not, oh, sorry, I'm guided well, 5. So who is the first to go? Apparently today we don't have many questions. I think we have only 2. The lady and the gentleman from Egerton. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony, for the presentation. I'm Elizabeth Joroge from Cosmopolitan SACCO. Now, as leaders, what short course can you recommend us to take? Not to become IT gurus, but just to have a grip of what is going on, such that when an attack happens, we are able to know and to be well knowledgeable of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Anton, for that able presentation. The day keeps on growing heavy and heavy. Yesterday we thought it was the heaviest, but today again, it is so heavy. But anyway, we are there and we have to face all those. Now that you have touched exactly what happens in our circles, and then this person who calls ICT person now, he looks as if he's the owner of the organization. At any point, he can bring butterfly or allow it to go. That is what I've noted. And at a certain level, then these are the people who should not be annoyed. We should not even come into loggerhead with them because they can misbehave at any time. I don't know how to go about that one. We think and assist us because when they hear we are out here, they want to know now those guys have gone there. Let's see whether they know that we know these things. But you've mentioned something to do with the trust, which of course is an integrity aspect. We don't know how we can change so that we have trust. But I believe up to now there's those trust in our circle because we still exist. The terms of billions and billions that have been lost. So my question here is it because of the reported cases that you were able to get that data, or how do you get that data? I'm worried because even mine might be among the billions there as I sit here. Because if you get through the way you know yourself, can we get to know whether even mine is there? Another thing is that these hackers does not happen instantly, or some happen instantly. It is some takes gradually. You might be in that position as we sit here and we are not. So the immediate signs and the symptoms to tell us that you know you are hacked. And then we start taking action. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Then Anthony, somebody at the back there, far back.
Thank you. My name is Arthur Mbugwa, Mwalimu SACCO. My first question is to Anthony, to you as an individual. I like to seek your opinion in terms of the cloud-based system and the on-prem. Probably most SACCOs probably are using Navision, and Microsoft are saying like in the next 5 years, they are going to move all their products to be cloud-based. So I want to hear your independent opinion in terms of which one is safer, or what are the pros and cons of the on-prem and the cloud-based system. But the second is to ISACA as a body. I want to know whether ISACA offer any pro bono services. ICT services sometimes are costly, and some small SACCOs might not be able to afford that cost of consultancy. So from ISACA point of view, do you offer pro bono services to organizations where we can tap into? And lastly is on the knowledge base. I think for the few cases of cyber issues that we've tried to prosecute in our organization, the criminal justice system lacks knowledge to prosecute these cases, starting with the investigation officer. So here is an IO who comes to your organization. He's learning those terminologies. This is the person who is supposed to do that investigation. Forget about the judge when some of these cases are presented in court. So as ISACA, what are you doing to add the knowledge base? And maybe you can also share what are some of the successful cases that have been prosecuted in Kenya as far as cyber issues are concerned. So what is ISACA doing to bring that knowledge base so that when these cases occur, they can be prosecuted with speed, and so that even the offenders can be prosecuted? Thank you.
Then this gentleman, we are summarizing with 5.
Thank you. My name is Dennis from Muiyuro SACCO. Anthony, I want to start with the Junja issue, which even today, as we are here, the government and the ISACA knows, and they're still happening. Even if an attack happens now, we'll still zero in and go back to Juja. So I would want to know what maybe ISACA or the government is doing, because all attack in Kenya, almost 99%, those students are still there. And we have very serious Kenyans right now who have invested and are paying those young tax to do those attacks. It has become a business. And we all remember even the Morot issue, which we all know, and even very high ranking government officials were touched by that issue. Number 2, as we set the tone from the top, maybe what you can tell us, because what you have given us is just a small issue, what do we need to do? As maybe as CEOs, we have invested in all those things, put all the infrastructure and everything. What do we have to do as we are sitting maybe in our offices that maybe we can detect? The issue of talking about trust is there, but we are holding our hearts in our hands, scanned each and every second that the system is running. What do we have to put in place that before even you upload the reports, that maybe you as a CEO or something, you can detect what is happening across your system? Thank you.
Yes, Anthony, now I think you can respond to this and also include, there are some people who are asking for your contact, how they can contact you later. So you remember that one.
All right. Very, very good questions. Very good questions. I think, let me start by saying, whatever I'm going to say cannot be held against me, right? I do not speak on behalf of the government. I'm just a professional, right? And I'll speak from a point of where we sit as a professional body. We have many interactions even with the government, so I'm just going to share what I know. But feel free to engage me maybe later on the same. So Elizabeth asked, what short course can you take to stay abreast with some of these cybersecurity matters? Even as ISACA, we have actually a very short, simple course. It's called CSX. CSX. And it's very cheap. In fact, you get certified, I think it's something below 20,000 shillings. Yeah? The equivalent in USD. It's very high level. It just talks about the principles, the basics, and the fundamentals of cybersecurity, particularly so that you're aware, right? So it's not a technical deep dive. So that's one. Number two, there is a site that I like, and this is one of the sites, even with my mentees and the students that I coach within cyber, I always tell them to visit it because it has a lot of free materials. And I want to believe they pretty much should have some governance-oriented materials that you can also look at. Yeah. We live in an interesting time. If you do not know anything, it's because you chose not to. Because these resources are there, right? Online. And it's a free site. It's called Cybrary, cybrary.it. So it has everything from data science to programming, Python to cybersecurity, among other things. Yeah. So you can also check it there. But also, one of the biggest resources that has helped me a lot. In fact, I went to two beautiful universities that I'm grateful. Really helped me to learn, I think, most of the things I know. The first university is called University of Google, and the second one is called University of YouTube. What I'm saying is that take advantage. You just need to type in. You'll see many, many free content. But if you want to invest now in a serious leadership program on matters cybersecurity, there's one by Harvard. It's a good investment. I don't want to say it's pricey, but it's a good investment. And it speaks to cybersecurity governance and risk management. Many CEOs actually take up that class. Yeah. So it talks about the fundamentals. And from your view, what are some of the things you need to be concerned about? So you might need to consider. It's by Harvard. I highly recommend it. I've had very good success or other feedback from the people I recommended them to do it. They were like, yes, this was true good value for money. I think it's something between $4,000, below $5,000, right? But I can tell you it's worth investing it in. The second question on trust. How do you know? How do you know if an attack has happened? Now, and it's a good question because every cyber attack will always leave clues. Yeah? We call it IOC, indicators of compromise. It will always leave clues. You'll always tell that something has happened. Number one, there's always like the first thing I would say is degradation of service. The system all of a sudden or the environment seems unstabilized. Yeah, that is normally number one. Like for instance, if your laptop is hanging for no apparent reason, you might need to restart it because when you do a restart, what happens? You cut off whatever connection that was there, right? So sometimes that tends to happen. So even when we are doing that, we always ask, like our clients, because we run those simulations for clients. So we always ask them, did you detect anything at this point? So that we share notes, so that it is going to increase their awareness that when it happens, they know. And that most of the time they tell us, by the way, we noticed this, this, and that. So that degradation of service would be one. The second thing I'll tell you is they're quite a lot, but I don't want to say the one that's normally very common across board is that degradation of service of something that was working very well. All of a sudden, there's just some change in behavior. But again, if this is a very skillful person who's doing it, you won't know it until you run maybe a proper investigation or something just to do the same. So the immediate signs would be that, but there can be many, but there's no single that this is ultimately what needs to be there for it to happen. Skillful guys will do it very stealthily. The other question by Arthur was on cloud versus on-prem, and you want to know which one is the best. If I can tell you my bias, I am pro cloud, but then secure cloud. How you migrate to cloud is also very important. And we have even security standards that ensures that as you're migrating to that cloud environment, it's done in a secure manner, but also more importantly, that cloud environment is secure and is also data privacy compliant. Very important. So we even have a framework that does that so that you can actually check. It's like a checklist that this and this before. And the best time to do this is when you're still having negotiations with that service provider. Because once you're in and you're asking for certain things, the motivation for them to provide tends to be lower, right? So when you have a cloud provider, we normally have a standard checklist and things you need to ensure they're there. But if you can, the obvious benefits of going to cloud far outweigh by far. If you manage the risk, far outweigh the risk, in my view. But that's a personal opinion, yeah? Because I've seen clients who are very apprehensive on migrating to cloud. Later down the line, like 2 years, they're like, this is the best thing we ever did. Why were you not thinking about that? Yeah, so that is just my view. Unless, of course, if you want to take a safer position, you can have a private cloud. If for you data privacy, residency, sovereignty, and all those factors are very important, and you're restricted by certain things, then you can still have it like a private cloud. Because we've actually seen a lot of traction in this space, even in the Data Protection Act. There's an inclusion for that. Yeah, it factors in that there are things you need to check. If a cloud provider is based in a certain region and all that, where is that data sitting? Is there a data privacy regulation in that country? If it's sitting in Germany, is it covered by whatever, be GDPR or whatever they're using? If it's sitting in the US or if it's sitting in Singapore, do you have a data privacy protection regulation, data privacy and protection regulation that's going to cover that territory? So those are now the nitty-gritties. Might be a bit complex, but it's somewhere you engage the experts who can advise you accordingly. But the benefits will obviously always outweigh, the risk if it's done well. And does ISACA offer pro bono services? Now this is an interesting. We are a not-for-profit entity. Our key mandate is to build capacity, train, and build the knowledge base that we have in the different areas of focus. Yeah. So as much as I may say that we do it at a highly subsidized rate, but what we also do, we have a collective of experts that can provide the services at a reasonable fee. I always say this: free is not a very good thing. Do you agree? Yeah, free is never a good thing. So I wouldn't look at it from just a pro bono, purely pro bono lens, because you might have a quack who's going to come to do it at a pro bono rate or pro bono, but I can tell you the damage that guy will do. You don't want that. So make sure you get the right people, and we can guide you and support you depending on where you are. And that's why we are committed when we have forums like this ones, where we can share knowledge. The little that we know, we always, we do it for free, and we want to spread this good message and this good gospel. So that's what we do. And then, of course, there's a question, an interesting one, on the knowledge base being built by our criminal justice system, and if it has capacity. Do you want the truth or the politically correct answer? Let me say the truth. I think we've come from far. Yeah. 4 years when we were having this discussion with them, it was completely different. But right now, I'm sure you all know that even DCI, they have a forensic lab. Yeah, you're aware, and they have very highly skilled guys there. Yeah. So even this digital forensic space, I can tell you the government has really prioritized it. And right now, we even have NC4. How many have heard about NC4? The National Cybersecurity and Coordination Committee. So it's a multi-agency approach. So Matter Cybersecurity, they're now like the de facto authority or agency that drives that. Sitting and working very closely with Communications Authority, where the KESAT is, that does the threat intelligence in our region. If you have a cyber attack or your organization has been breached, they actually have a portal for CA. I'm sure Sitati did an excellent job in his presentation. He's a friend of mine. So those are the guys who you report to them, and then they work with DCI. DCI, they have their forensic lab, and even the criminal justice system. They obviously consult with these experts. What am I saying? We may not be there 100%, but there has been some improvement. There is an act that we have, the Computer Cybercrime and Computer Misuse Act. Yeah, that also speaks to, it has actually the legal framework for even prosecution and how to treat matters cybercrime. Yeah, because that's where it starts. If it's not anchored in any law, then it's just hogwash. True or false? But now we have a law there, but from a staff and capacity building perspective, this is something that, of course, there's already investments. There's a time, in a different forum, there was a training for the judiciary officers. I just happened just to have a very small slot to speak on something. So I can tell you this is a focus area because, things and matters have moved digital. So even for them, the agenda for them is also to upskill. That's a good story, right? So it's not saying that they're not doing anything. They are doing. But sometimes it takes time. Because remember, you're reskilling. These are some of the people who are used to the old school way of doing things. Like even having a judge who understands technology very well. You're going to tell them that we have a blade server that was compromised, that was MS-DOS, blah, 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 that can actually ask relevant questions. And you don't have to be a techie to do that. Some of them, in fact, they get experts like myself. We go there and we guide them and tell them, this and this is true, this is not true. And we've seen a lot of that. And I don't want to mention names, but that I have seen. There are friends of mine who go in an advisory capacity to help in certain matters in that space. So it's a good thing. And we are seeing that appreciation. Because by the time you have this new breed of graduates from law school that were now taught cybersecurity within their curriculum, it takes some interventions in between. And right now, I don't know if we have a lawyer in the room, you can keep me honest. The current legal curriculum in most universities, I think they have a unit on cybersecurity or something that speaks to matters technology. I don't know if we have a lawyer in the room. He or she can keep me honest on this. Yeah? Great. And then successful cases that have been prosecuted. Yes, we've had a few. Unfortunately, sometimes you look at also the penalty. Is it commensurate to the crime? That's where the challenge is. If I've hacked 100 million from a bank, for instance, and you're telling me my bail is 150,000, is it commensurate? It's not. So I'm like, there's no deterrent. Like, it's okay. If I get caught, it's fine. Yeah? So those are some of the things I can tell maybe we need to improve on just to make sure that the penalties are commensurate to that crime. And it's not an omnibus approach. Yeah? The last question, I think, is what the government is doing to solve the cyber attacks from Juja. And by the way, full disclaimer, I used to be in that university, so I have nothing against them. In fact, in my view, and I'm sure you all know which university it is, I think it produces some of the best brains we have in tech. Yeah, and the good stories and the people who are doing good are far much more than the interesting guys. But what is the government doing about it? I'll tell you, they have their ears on the ground. That is for sure. In fact, it's not just Juja. Even this other side of Kasarani. Yeah? Yeah. There's some interesting things that have come from that side. So the government has ears on the ground. They know. And these people are also tracked because these syndicates are there. Yeah? And some of them, I'll tell you as an association, you see, and this is where we are really pushing that ethical channel so that people know you can actually do this thing, but you don't have to go the criminal way. You can do it as a professional. Yeah? And that is, so if you have a nephew, a son, a daughter, a friend, a neighbor who has those skills and you're scared they might go that route, please talk to me. We'll take good care of them. And the success stories have actually been better. I'll tell you, one of my mentees, he's working for, is it VW? Yeah, VW, Volkswagen, yeah? And his work is actually to make sure the new smart cars, before it comes from the factory, he has to do a test of that. And he's only 26. And that guy, on average, I think in a month, he makes like 35,000 USD. Not married, no kids. Why? Because he's talented. He just got into a community and opportunities showed up. And we normally have those competitions, and if they stand out, opportunities look for them. What we need to do to set the tone to mature cybersecurity, and this is an excellent question, and it actually speaks to the last slide that I had, is you need to make sure that you're setting the tone in terms of expectation. What do you want to see? For instance, for me, I would actually ask if, number one, and let me just say this briefly. For any successful attack to happen, two things need to occur, the conditions. Number one, there has to be a vulnerability somewhere. And number two, there has to be a what? A threat actor. So on the vulnerability side is asking questions like patch level. How has it been done? When you talk about upgrading the infrastructure, it's also understanding the same. And I can tell you, a very good litmus test when you go to your audit report or your IT audit report, particularly if you got someone to do a cybersecurity audit, that's the place to start. Because it actually shows you everything as it is. So it's also tracking those issues year and year, but also having the thematic focus areas like patch management, security configurations, and making sure you're getting those reports. And then asking questions such as, particularly when you talk about detection of some of these attacks, do they understand? Yeah. So those are some of the things that I can talk, and it's a whole area, and we have those frameworks that ideally would go to the nitty-gritties. But the key thing is you need to have actionable input and data from your team. So, and those are now the questions that, do we have policies that speak to this? How many policies? Is it approved? Is it updated? Okay. And secondly, what are we detecting? If you ask your guy who's the IT security engineer or IT security head, can we detect how many attacks have happened, like even from the firewall? Yeah, at a periphery level. Because you also want to gauge, is this person aware? Do they track this thing? And then secondly, the audit issues that were detected, what has been closed? And then also running simulations, because now that's going to give you end-to-end visibility on everything. But more importantly, conducting a cyber maturity assessment. I don't think there are two ways around it, because a cyber security maturity assessment is the actual test to tell you where you guys are. So it actually gives you, remember the maturity rating I spoke about, the CMMI index. It will tell you within financial institutions, based on the kind of nature and data that you have, the kind of transactions that you have, the kind of revenues that you have, you need to be maybe at a 3.0 maturity. So if we do that cyber maturity assessment, and at Deloitte we do it a lot for many organizations in the region, is we understand that your current rating, maybe it's like 2, but then the question is, how do you move from 2 to 3.5? And that is what we also guide our professional members so that they can drive this within the organization. So when you conduct a cyber maturity assessment, it's going to give you those gaps. And those are the gaps that now the team, they need to now report on what they're doing. If there's a gap in terms of staff awareness and training, track that. And even further, put it in their KPI, because it's going to speak to their day-to-day functional responsibility. In fact, I always argue, any financial institution needs to have a risk management KPI, default for everyone. Yeah? Do you agree with me? To manage your risks. So the guys in tech, the guys in IT, their risk management KPI needs to speak also to cybersecurity, to risk management from an information perspective, data privacy, and all those things. You can get creative on that, but make it something that's going to contribute to their overall performance, and you're going to see a difference. That's it.